Tuning into the first interview of the interview series, Super Women. We are incredibly proud that today one of the true super women of this world has joined us, Aya Chebbi. But before I give the floor to her and we really venture into her story, her path, her calling, I would like to tell you, how did the Ban Ki-moon Center come up with this idea? Well, I had the privilege in the past couple of years to meet incredible women worldwide. And actually, some of the best conversations took place off and away from the conferences. At the coffee shops, restaurants, and I fighters, active, and yet all of them, if you're thinking of super, might have your own ideas about them. It could be your mom, it could be your auntie, it could be your sister, it could be a friend of yours. Examples of his foundation. You have exposure to Fulbright scholarship. You have been named, and there were so many awards that I only picked some 100 most influential African women. You have been labeled as the person of African politics and governments, amongst others. You are belonging to the world's 100 most influential young people in government. And of course, you won the Inspirational Women of the Award and the Pan-African Award, and I could go on and on. And dear Aya, I know you stand for commitment, and why should they know it? Please tell us your story, Aya.
And Monika, first of all, this is a big day, congratulations for the launch of the Superwomen. And I'm sure you are also a superwoman for many of the people you'll be interviewing. So thank you so much for creating the platform that is much, much needed in this time of COVID-19. So that generous introduction of you just make me a little bit emotional. But thank you for having me today. It's really exciting, and everyone watching us as well. It's so important, I think, to own our narrative. And that's something I've learned from Tunisia's revolution. When I started my blog, I started out of frustration. The word called it the Arab Spring and the Arab Awakening and whatnot. And I'm like, no, that's a Western narrative. It's the revolution of dignity. We're not only Arabs, we're Amazigh, we're all sorts of shades of Africa. So you can't label us. And I think it's important because the conversation also you're trying to have with these superwomen starts from identity. If you don't know who you are, and if you don't tell the word who you are, then the words start putting labels on you. And that was super important to me in my journey, that I own my narrative, I own my voice. I started a blog read by millions of people, and I started that conversation of, no, this is who we are, and this is what we did in the revolution, and you should pick that narrative and make it the mainstream, not the exception. And I used to say during the revolution that we make the news until we become the news. So that's why social media is powerful. That's why all these platforms are powerful, because now you create content that is picked up by mainstream media to become the content. So just to go back to your question, I think there were two turning points in my life. One is when I turned from, a woman, a girl, to a feminist, because feminism is so important to me. But it was through an early experience in life. I grew up in a very religiously conservative Muslim family in Tunisia, and I come from a small village in the north west of Tunisia, between Algeria and Tunisia on the borders. And there was a traditional ritual called tasfih, the locker. So it was practiced on girls before you get your period. So I think I was about like 9 years old. And the ritual believed that it needs to happen to safeguard the girl's virginity and prevent them from having sexual intercourse, just like the practices trying to, kind of control women's bodies. So at the age of 9, I sit there with, an elder woman, with my female cousins. She scratched my knees 9 times, make me eat dry, and say a few words about locking something. I have no idea what's happening. I'm just crying. I'm a little girl crying, not understanding what's going on. But I think the most important, I think, for me, is that consciousness. It started a long trauma. You know, it's of course it's nothing compared to FGM and all sorts of violation that started as, okay, so now the violation of my body might heal physically, but the violation of my mind, the trauma, the psychological damage, how it's gonna heal. And it was difficult indeed, because we live in society that there is no time to consider trauma healing as a necessity for growth for children. And so after crying that night, I realized that at that young age, I have gone through some sort of violation of my rights because of my gender. So I'm so young, I'm not, and yet that consciousness of me, because of my gender, something is happening to me, or I'm subjected to something. And I became convinced that these practices later on, with, you know, education and experiences, I became very convinced that, you know, these kind of practices are weapons of patriarchy to just trap women in inequality. So my activism started from that point, standing up for my rights, challenging the traditional norms, you know, even became a rebel in my family, my extended family, you know, standing up for myself. This is what I want to wear. This is what I want to be. I'm grateful to have a feminist father, even though he doesn't call himself feminist. But, you know, we live in society where there is the head of the family. And if the head of the family backs you up, then you can do whatever the hell you want. And that was my father. You know, he didn't agree on anything, but he would be the person to allow me to be, you know, to allow me to grow, to allow me to speak up for myself. And even though he spent most of his time in the military, so he wasn't easy. He's a person of, you know, discipline and you know, control and all these things. But I'm grateful that he was one in the family who just was convinced that I deserve the same chances as anyone else, and he nurtured that courage in me. And so I think the second kind of turning point in my life from that point on is that rebel then became a political voice in the revolution, because it wasn't new to me to rebel, because I've done that like for 18 years, maybe from 9 years old to when I got my graduation from high school. But then when I went to college, and then when the whole revolution, you know, started, it wasn't me, that drive, it wasn't me, but it manifested in ways I didn't think is possible. I didn't think I could be that fearless. I didn't think I could be on the front line. I didn't think I could, you know, speak up against injustice like that. And when I started to reflect on that a couple of years after, I realized that that was the point. That was the point when I stood up for myself as a girl, you know, and I said no to violating my right to become, you know, politically engaged and in the revolution, and then to really and afraid, you know, I used to say, and afraid to die for freedom, like young women like myself, 22 years old, and all the women who were with me were you know, willing to die for freedom. You were confronting injustice. You knew like the next person to you is shot. Like you knew you could be arrested, you could die, but you stood up because you had that drive and courage to stand up for something. And I think to think also of the next generation, because you might not see the result of what you're trying to do with your action right there. You might not even believe change can happen. And I think when change happened for me, since then, I didn't believe anything is impossible. Like for me, I was part of change, and change happened. I stood up for that. It happened. And now I'm like, nothing is impossible. Now I can go fearlessly and do whatever I want. And I think that's an important feeling for a young woman, because we're very much boxed into, you can't do that. You're not good enough. You know, and once you find that liberation, you're like, now politically, economically, all the judgment, and I can do what I want. I can make change. I can be part of change. So I think those are really key moments I would never forget in my life. The moment I went through Tasfih, the locker, and the moment I was in the middle of Tunisia's revolution, just fearlessly, you know, in the middle of that crowd, knowing that anything can happen, but very like courageously and positively, and just feeling the energy of all the people standing up for one thing and united. It's just unbelievable feeling of freedom. It's a grace. I wish everyone could feel at any time in their life a moment of like freedom and liberation, not only for a cause or for your country, but when you liberate your own self from your own fears, from the judgments, from the misconceptions, then you blossom, you know, then you become something that the world can see as well.
I've had so much goosebumps now, chicken skin, whatever you call it. Oh my goodness. Yes, your words are inspiring. And yet I believe that many of our listeners will ask, how did you do that? Like, not only that you kept the motivation, but how did you then put it into practice, your learnings, your experience of empowering others and making the change? Beautiful, like a beautiful representative of Africa said as well, be the change. And this is exactly what you are. Like, you're living it. You're being the change that you want to see. And I would like to know, can you tell our audience how you did it? I know that there are so many initiatives that you founded. There is the African movement, there is the Pan-African youth movement that you started. Tell them a bit about the how.
So, you know, when I think about my, like, when people ask about career path and how do you become envoy and all that, in my mind is like, I didn't plan for the spaces I'll be in. I only defined my identity and my mission, and then those took me to the spaces that I'm in right now. And really, funny enough, I've always been the first to hold any position. So even before the envoy, I'm the first ever envoy, but before that, I was the first. There was a program I started, and then the organization hired me, and they're like, okay, let's go on and coordinate all Africa. And then I go on to do, I remember this interview I did for a big position. I was only 24. I was looking for a job, and I was unemployed for quite a while. So I went for like an interview of a position of 10 years of experience, and I'm going with my 2-page CV. It's all community service and revolution and blogging and whatnot. And then the boss came back to me. He's like, we didn't hire you for that position. We found someone with 15 years experience, but we want you to do exactly what you're doing, and we will create a position for you. So go on and tell us who are the young people we need to fund, who are the projects in Tunisia we need to support. And so, like, I realized then that what someone needs to focus on is not, okay, what positions I need to get, or what space I need to get into, but actually, what do I want to achieve? And then those are just vehicles of change. And so I see also my role now as an envoy as a vehicle of change. I see my office as a space where young people feel we are a bridge, where they feel they can participate. And so like AYM and all the initiative, I think the journey that after the revolution, I started, actually, there was one time where I volunteered at the refugee camp on the Tunisian Libyan border when Libya revolution started as well. So I went there, and then I spent a month, and my dad, of course, was handling the camp in the military. And I saw, like, it was like exploring Africa's historiography for me. Like, all migrants from all corners of Africa were there in that one place. And I'm like, this is like Africa in one place. And I spent my time just listening to stories, sitting with them, curious about it. And it triggered something in me that, why am I not, like, why have we never been exploring our identities as Africans? I have the Arab identity, the Amazigh identity, the Mediterranean, the Maghrebian identity, but we've never brought up to think we're part of Africa, you know? The North is very much disconnected. And that started, for me, that moment, I started to question it. So I took my backpack, I applied for this grant. They gave me a flight ticket. Again, I was about like 24 years old, maybe. And, you know, because I have a supportive father, I don't think in our society, and many fathers would be like, yeah, go, I don't know what the hell you're doing or where are you going, but go ahead. You know, that's why it's important to have a support system. So I took a flight, I went to Kenya, and that was the start of traveling to over 30 African countries, trying to mobilize young people, train young people in blogging and leadership and nonviolent things I've learned by doing. I've not been taught on or trained on. And that's where I met thousands and thousands of youth organizers and feminist groups. And then I realized that in every corner of Africa, I felt that I belong. I felt, I go to Senegal and Ramadan and I sit with people and break the fast, and then I go to East Africa, they speak Swahili, and I'm like, that's Arabic to me, similar culture, similar food, similar beat. You go to Niger, it's the same instrument we have in Tunisia. And so to me, it was like, I belong here. That's my identity. I'm Pan-African. And so I need to do something about it. And maybe I can also be the bridge, because I can be a bridge across cultures, I can be a bridge across languages, I can be a bridge across religions. So that was my calling, like that Pan-African, identity was my calling. And I started to dig deeper, and I was fascinated by this, idea of Pan-Africanism, that in the liberation movement in 1 year, in 1960, 10 African countries got independence at one time. And I'm like, the colonizer didn't decide to free all of us at one time. It's the people who organized across borders. It's the solidarity. And I think that's super important. When you organize and when you find your identity, then you can start to create things, and you can be passionate about it, and you can continue to create them. Because even when I started Africa Youth Movement, it's exhausting to organize youth across a big, diverse continent. But because you have that drive, because you believe that in African unity, in youth taking power, in youth taking charge, in 60% of the population, taking charge of their own destiny, you can do it. Exactly. And that will keep you going.
Right. And as we are dealing with the biggest generation of youth ever, and Africa is literally the continent that has a youth potential which is absolutely incredible and unparalleled. I know that your work is so important, and now during the COVID crisis, you showcased again that collaboration, community, really talking to one another and acting upon the things that you believe need to change really makes a difference. So maybe you can tell the audience about your most recent efforts in matters of COVID-19 and what triggered in the African communities all across the continent.
Yeah, I think it was super important to me the first time the outbreak started in Africa in February, that we go back to young people and ask them, how are you doing? Right. What is happening to you right now? Right. And so I remember I started the first consultation with 2 young people showing up. I just started like a webinar on Zoom, and I made a call to National Youth Council, and 2 showed up. I'm like, we need to consult with youth. We need to know what is the impact, what are the best practices, how are you trying to respond to this, and what are the main challenges that you're facing. And I didn't expect, really, it's a teamwork. My team was, like working day and night in the most like beginning of the crisis. We ended up doing 22 consultations, and we had at one time 700 people in one Zoom call. And I'm like, that's how much young people need space. And we were so proud that we were able to provide that space. So we organized the virtual AU Youth Consultation Series on COVID-19. And then we turned them, with the ask from youth, from focus groups, small conversations, to public intergenerational dialogue. So youth asked to have direct engagement with decision makers. And we're like, yes, this is our role. Let's bring you the decision makers. So we had a guest every week, and they had direct engagement with young people. And then many things emerged from that. So it was, I think for me, it's really important that in my role, I don't only work with young people, but I also change or show the institution, how can you do it? How can you engage? How can it be bottom-up approach? Because when we launched, for example, the African Youth Front on coronavirus, which really makes the African Union the first, and maybe only right now, the intergovernmental institution to provide in a time of crisis space at high level for young people to co-lead the response, it was more like, okay, so how do we engage youth? And we're like, we do consultations, we listen to what young people need, we do intergenerational dialogue, we see what's, the outcome of that. And then now we create a space for them to feed into policy making and so on. And so when the African Youth Front coronavirus was launched finally, many of the leaders also in the institution were like, this is how we can, meaningfully engage young people. And they come up with, policy briefs, they come up with a survey, they had 1,000 people participating. Now they're trying to do a campaign on masks. So it's thrilling to me to see that it's, even though it's virtual, and we need to acknowledge 70% of Africa is offline, and everything we do working with member states a lot of the testing and tracing and what Africa CDC is doing is seen on the ground, but much of opening space and conversation is virtually, unfortunately. And so we need to at least reach those 30% with information, but also give them the platform to be bold and to express themselves and to, you know, share with each other best practices. Many of the youth we brought together, they were, you know, we have like a big leader having a conversation, and then on the chat I look and they were like changing WhatsApp and creating WhatsApp groups and whatnot. And I'm happy even a whole movement was created out of those webinars. There was youth against African youth against COVID-19. They started their own movement, their own WhatsApp groups. They add me like everywhere. And for me, that's it. That's co-creation, that's collaboration, that's opening space, that's how you empower youth. And it, you know, advocacy takes time. Of course, we won't be able maybe to see the results right now, but I'm hoping something like this, when we finish the work with the Youth Front, it can be a case study on how do you engage young people in emergency situation, in a pandemic situation. So when next time it happens, you have it, you know, this is the steps to take. This is how to create the platform. This is how to empower them. So that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping to kind of plant the seeds for something that can be useful and can be replicated at national level and regional level. But I'm also, if you know, African youth are watching us right now, I just want to say we are now in the peak in Africa, and we need you more than ever. You know, our job is not done. I know you're tired, you're exhausted. It's been 3 months, it's been lockdown, it's been emotionally draining, but we need to stand up for Africa right now. It's the time that we wear our mask, we follow hygiene, we, you know, watch all the measures, because it's our peak. Even though you see the word, you know, a peak declining in other countries, you need to look at our own context, and we need now to stand up for Africa together. So I really call on all of you to not give up and not get exhausted. Let's continue until the end to beat this pandemic and this virus.
Beautifully said, Aya. Beautiful. Yes, Africa unite. All of us have a similar goal in this one. And definitely the youth plays a key role. There is no doubt about that. Let me probe you on something that we haven't tried before in our interview formats, and I think you haven't tried yet. I would love to do something that is called a word wrap with you. So I give you only a part of the thought and you complete it. That's the idea of the word wrap. And it will take you probably to ideas that you might not have pondered about preparing for this, I guess.
Let's do it.
So my first challenge to you, dear Aya, is if I ever have to go to prison, then I would do that for?
A revolution.
Wow. All right. All right. That's a bold answer. What would you say if I was a man, I would?
Be humble.
Interesting. Good one. Very good.
I could do a sentence or just a word.
You can also do a sentence. Whatever comes to mind. Feel free.
Be humble in the fight for gender equality, because that's the women's fight. So be humble in that journey.
Huh. Wonderful. Next one is, I have secrets about.
My family.
Okay, fair enough. When I check into a hotel, I write down in the field occupation.
Activist.
Cool. This is a good one. I love it. I absolutely love it. So
I'm struggling with it now, because now I finally have a title, you know, ever in my life, you know. So I'm like, oh no, I'm the envoy now. But
you write envoy?
You know, in the airport when you have to write, you know, I used to just write activist.
And did that ever cause a problem? Like activist, like for people sometimes it's like, ooh, rebel activist.
What is your job? I'm like, I don't have a job. I just go around and work with young people.
This is awesome. So field of occupation, activist. I hope that many of our listeners too do that. This is beautiful. Next question is, my mother calls me.
Ayuta.
Oh, Ayuta. Cool. That's reserved for her, I guess. I have two more of these, and then we go into, I give you one word, but two more of these sentences that I would like you to complete. I cannot understand that?
In 2020, we still have gender inequality and misogyny.
Poof, poof. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Unbelievable.
And the last one of the sentences is, my favorite book right now is?
I've been reading a lot. Which one of them? I'm actually about to finish Bagba. It's a cartoon book about anti-corruption, written by my friend Robtel from Liberia.
Oh, excellent.
So I encourage everyone to find out about her.
How can we get a copy? Do you know?
I think it's online. If you write Bagba, you can find it, and she won a lot of awards for it as well.
Yeah, anti-corruption triggers immediately something that I heard just a couple of days ago. Imagine, would all the money that anti-corruption is actually trickling off to, would all that money be available, we could definitely implement all of the SDGs. We wouldn't have a funding gap for the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations.
I know, and with all that money we're traveling with, you know, I'm like wondering now, where is all that money we used to travel with and do all these huge conferences? Give it to young people in the community to do the job.
I hope we have listeners who will abide by that. Listen up, listen up. Where's the money? Give it to youth. This is good. Okay, let us go to the word wrap, where I really give you one word and you can give me either a sentence or also just one word that comes to mind. So brace yourself. The first word is identity.
Pan-African.
Patriarchy. Patriarchy.
Is a threat to Pan-Africanism.
Feminism.
Is radical when women support women.
Competition. Competition.
Is masculine.
Collaboration.
Is feminine.
Wow. Okay, okay. I'm curious about the comments of this afterwards in our various channels. What comes to mind with the word growth?
Inner peace.
What comes to mind with Africa?
Oh. What I breathe every day, what I live for every day, like everything, my soul, my mind, my heart, all of me, Africa.
Africa. What comes to mind with youth? Youth.
It's such a power that is undermined.
What comes to mind with dignity?
The essence of a human family.
And last one, appreciation?
Necessary every day, every minute.
Thank you, Aya. That was beautiful. As a last question before we wrap up this first interview of the interview series, Superwoman, I would like to know what would be, if you're beaming yourself back to, let's say, the 14 or 15-year-old Aya, what would be your recommendation to her? What would be your wisdom that you would like to share with her?
So, you know, I started this radical Aya thing 2 years ago because particularly of that, of how girls like me in that time, you know, couldn't feel empowered. And the motto that I go with is be whatever the hell you want to be as a girl and as a young woman, but also your power is your radical self. Find it, because you need to use that power every single day. So find that identity, find that badass self of you and live it. You don't have to dream about things, you have to live your dream. So live that dream, be that badass girl and liberated. So find your radical self.
Love it. A badass as the last word of this first series of Superwomen. Aya, this has been incredible. I could continue talking to you for another hour, and I hope we will meet and we will be face to face over a coffee cup. It's been a pleasure and a delight. For everyone out there, check out Aya's website, check out the amazing work she does. She has not only a voice to be heard, but also many stories to tell, as much as the people that she makes shine and that she empowers, because she's connected to these wide networks. So check out the Africa Youth Movement, check out Africa Inspire, check out Bring Back Our Girls, the peace retreats, the mentorships that she's engaged with, AfResist, etc., etc. So Aya, thanks again so much. If you guys out there want to tune into the next episode of Superwomen, do so. It's happening on the 2nd of September. We have another stellar speaker. Her name is Jayatma. She is a common friend actually of ours. She is the UN Youth Envoy, a force of nature, a superwoman par excellence from Sri Lanka. And she will tell us about her perspective and her calling and why she's fighting for what she's fighting for. Aya, thanks again. To the audience, thanks so much for listening in. Tune in next time, and all the best. Superwomen, empower one another. Bye.
Bye-bye.